Hi, I'm DM Galabond, and last week at the table, we look at what happened in the 3 actual play games I run on my Twitch channel, which you can find over at twitch.tv/Galabond. Let's get on with the show. On Thursday night, we played Session 2 of our Essentials game. Abinadom, Gabriel, Finn, and Dorzafir all enjoyed an evening of merrymaking at the Stonehill Inn. Finn played music and told some stories to liven the crowd. A serving maid lured Harbin to the inn with a plate of Mrs. Innkeeper's baked goods. He entered the place looking like a hunted and nervous man. Finn worked the crowd, singing ballads to make some men weep and telling tales of town heroics and history that brought smiles to all the faces. Harbin was suspicious of the party at first, terrified in fact that one of them was the dragon in disguise. Eventually the party convinced him of their non-draconic identities, and he made them founding members of the Phandalin Adventurers Guild, complete with a token that they could show to merchants in town who might have work for them to do. Abinadom, the wizard, went outside for a bit to have his owl familiar Bandit fly above the town and scout to see if there was any trouble around. After a time, he came back in with the familiar not having spotted any trouble. Harbin, the town master, glad-handed his constituents and thanked the PCs profusely with his meaty handshakes. He proclaimed that the town's dragon troubles were all but ended, and he identified the three of the townsfolk who have reported a need for the Adventurers Guild to look into problems. Halia, over at the Miners' Exchange, Barthen, over at Barthen's Provisions, and the innkeeper himself, here at the Stonehill Inn. The next morning, the party asked the innkeeper what needed looking into. He told them about the town midwife who lives alone in an old windmill over on Umber Hill. It's too dangerous for a woman to be out there alone, the innkeeper said, and the Adventurers Guild should bring her back to town so she can be safe while the dragon attacks, or while the dragon is nearby. The innkeeper will give each of the adventurers 25 gold pieces for her safe return, and they should tell the midwife that the innkeeper has a room set aside for her to use until the dragon is completely dealt with. Finn was thinking that perhaps the innkeeper might be sweet on the midwife, and that may be a reason why he has so much of a concern for her. I'm sorry, not Finn, but Dorzafir. Dorzafir is our rogue in the party. Finn is the bard. Gabriel pressed the innkeeper for any other pertinent information, but the innkeeper really didn't have any more. So after a brief discussion, all the party members decided to set out, thinking, oh, this should be pretty easy. Just go get the midwife and bring her back to town. So the party set out for Umber Hill after breakfast, arriving at the windmill around midday. And upon their arrival, they saw that the windmill was being attacked by a manticore, and the midwife was trapped inside. When she saw the party, she cried for help out of a high window in the building. The party used the fact that the manticore was focused on the windmill to hide behind some cairns on the hillside, and gained a surprise round of attacks against the flying monster. Abinadom unleashed magic missiles to strike the creature. Dorzafir was able to get a sneak attack in with his bow since the party had a surprise round. Gabriel shot the manticore with a longbow. Unfortunately, Finn missed with his first round of attacks, but he made up for it by granting Dorzaphir his bardic inspiration for the next round, or bardic inspiration for the next 10 minutes. The Manticore was angry and hurt, and it turned to attack the party. It let fly a tail spike that struck and badly injured Dorzaphir. Okay, now here I need to pull the DM curtain aside a little bit. This particular adventure calls for pitting 6 level 1 adventurers against a full-grown Manticore. Now, by the way encounters are set up, that would be a hard challenge for a party of 6. But in our session, we only had 4 adventurers. And that's a deadly encounter because a Manticore is supposed to be able to get either Claw Bite in melee or supposed to be able to shoot 3 tail spikes every round. And with with only 4 characters, 3 tail spikes from range, you could have a TPK real quick. So I wanted to avoid the first encounter TPK, and I decided that the Manticore would be allowed to get its 3 melee attacks if it could ever get within melee range of an enemy, but I would only allow it to have a single ranged attack instead of letting it attack with 3 of the tail spikes each round. And as it turns out, I probably didn't need to do that because the party actually was able to nearly bloody the creature in that first round of sneak attacks. So I probably could have allowed it to go ahead and have its 3 attacks, but maybe just spread those attacks out among the different PCs. Anyway, I'll be sure I don't give the party any additional breaks in the future. So in the second round, Gabriel shot the Manticore again and finally bloodied it. Abinadom successfully attacked the creature with a ray of frost, which slowed its movement. This proved to be an important point in the battle. Now Dorzaphir was worried about getting hit by another tail spike, and he used his full round movement to go and hide from the creature's sight. Finn shot his bow at the Manticore, and he missed again. He moved a bit, and he was able to confer his bardic inspiration to Gabriel this time. So the Manticore was slowed by Abinadom's spell, and was unable to get within melee range of any target. So he moved as close as possible to Gabriel and shot with a tail spike. Now, due to the angle and range that the monster had and the stone cairns that the PCs were hiding behind, I gave the monster disadvantage on his attack, and he missed. So Gabriel hit the monster again with another shot from his longbow, and then he moved further away to try to get some more distance. Abinadom missed the creature with his ray of frost this time, and the slow effect evaporated from the creature. So Dorzaphir was once again able to connect with a bow shot, and then he tried to get a little further away. Now, Finn admitted by this time to being fully terrified of the monster. He decided he needed to run, but as he did, he launched a shot at the Manticore, and then as he spun to flee, there was a strangled cry from the creature, and it crashed to the ground dead. After the Manticore fell, the midwife apothecary ran out of the windmill and brought a healing potion to Dorzaphir. Gabriel informed the midwife of the reason they were here and that they were to bring her back to town, and she balked at that. Now, Finn reminded her of the threat of the dragon in the area, and still she didn't want to leave. But eventually, as a group, the party persuaded and cajoled and encouraged her to return to Phandalin with them, if only to appease the townsfolk. She said she would grab several necessary items before going with them, and that would take a few minutes. So while the midwife collected her things, the party harvested some components from the Manticore. Abinadom took some items for spell components, Gabriel took a tail spike as a personal trophy from the victory, and Dorzaphir lopped off the entire tail to take back to town as proof that the party deserved hazard pay. So back at the Stonehill Inn, the party successfully convinced Master Stonehill that he should give them 50 gold pieces each instead of 25 gold pieces, mainly by slapping the manticore's tail on the bar and telling the tale of slaying it in a very loud voices so that it drew a huge crowd to the inn. Um, as they paraded the manticore tail through the town, it attracted a large crowd, and the inn was filled with revelers that night. The innkeeper made a tidy profit, and Finn was called on to tell the tale of the battle multiple times. Now, Finn used his full array of instruments in telling the tale, and he spun it as being kind of in the vein of Peter and the Wolf, where every instrument represented a different hero or NPC or the monster itself. And with his humor and drama, he pulled off some great performances. And that's where our session ended, and we'll pick it up there next week. So on Saturday, we played session 12 of the History of D&D. We began with questioning the captive cleric Lareth and his guards. This actually wound up taking most of the session, and the PCs learned a bit more about the state of the world, which was exposition necessary because several new players have joined the game at different points in the story arc so far. Now, the party this time learned that 2 new adventurers came with the village council members and the town guards to the moat house. First, they met Zalvadora, and then they met Wohip the dwarf, who would love to be a cleric. Zalvadora, uh, by the way, she is a fighter. So Omu and Siren decided to play good cop, bad cop routine with Lareth. Omu began by demanding to know what Lareth and his soldiers were doing here in the service of Bargle. Lareth talked about serving a goddess whose name my lips are not worthy to utter. He also says that the Sylvan Empire is in decline because of corrupt leadership. The elves have lost their way, and this goddess will choose pure leaders and put them in charge so the Sylvan Empire can reclaim its glory. Now, Siren thought back through his elf school, thinking about all of the deities that are associated with the Empire, and a deity that sounds like this is nowhere in the standard or traditional doctrine that young elves learn. Now there was some exposition about the history of the Sylvan Empire and how, in general, the races view each other. Because, of course, Lareth implied that somehow this lady thought elves to be superior to everyone else. Now, Wesley was able to join the game a few minutes late, playing his character Sylvia, and Sylvia had a little back and forth with Lareth. The priest basically says that the elves here, in this setting, in this party, are all corrupt and filthy non-believers who allow humans to hold equal places with them. Our Lady, as he calls the goddess that they serve, will restore the glory of the empire by choosing dedicated and pure elves who know their place and know that they should lead the empire to glory. Now, Wohip wanted to see if he had heard about any deities matching the description of the goddess that Lareth described, but it doesn't sound like anyone he's ever heard about being worshipped. That probably means that there's some cult of the kind that springs up from time to time, either following some sort of dark power or abyssal demon or something like that that's trying to pose as a deity. So Omu asked for the guards to search the prisoner, and they found a pouch that clinks with coins. Um, they found a very shiny suit of plate mail, a very shiny bracer on the cleric's right hand, and they discovered that he has a very nifty black staff with 8 quartz crystals at one end. They determined that probably the armor, the bracer, and the staff are all magical. So Sylvia checked the staff and couldn't determine if it's magic or not because she didn't have the detect magic spell memorized for the day. But she did realize that the gems are arranged on the staff in the same pattern as the 8 dots on the symbol of Bargle, which is shown here. Now, during all of this questioning, the Knoll allies that the party had made were hanging around, and the Knoll leader eventually came over to Siren and asked if it was time to rip the throat out of the cleric that just keeps yammering on and on. Elmo, one of the village council members, suggested that it would probably be protocol to hold Lareth in Dedale and send to the provincial capital, which is over at Olenathius, because they would probably want to question this Lareth and find out more about their cult. And Zert, the woodsman, who's also associated with the village council, he suggested to Siren that it would be better to hold Lareth, but he suggested that the Knolls would be welcome to have Lareth's bodyguards. This is back in the day where, life is cheap and, the wages of following the wrong, socially incorrect deity are that you basically, unless you're a high value target with a lot of intel, you're kind of worthless. And so if there's monstrous humanoids that are thirsty for blood, yeah, sure, we'll just go ahead and throw you to them. So a knot of 8 town guards took Lareth away to hold him back in Dedale. And Salvador was fascinated by the Knolls, and she eventually won the trust of one that she scratched behind the ears for a little bit until she realized that the Knolls planned to kill and eat Lareth's bodyguards, and then she was a little bit horrified by that. Brother Tuck, who's another one of the townsfolk associated with the village council, he advised that in the grand scheme of things, leaving the ex-bodyguards for the Knolls allows the monsters to be agents of justice for the gods. The followers of this mysterious dark goddess have done many evil deeds in her service, and they must pay for those crimes. If not at the point of a sword, then in the belly of a Knoll will do just as well for them. And around that time, Dora's player derailed the entire game for a few minutes by flirting with one of the NPC town guards. That was quite a humorous incident that happened during the game. Well, anyway, the party went downstairs and checked out the rest of the complex. They've heard about a monster-infested well, which is in the area circled on the map there, but they have not yet explored that direction. So they retraced the steps to the vanquished enemies and made their way to Lareth's chamber. They found it appointed sumptuously with fine, rich furnishings, expensive jewels, plenty of gold, and some correspondence, probably with Bargle. And the letter that they found reads as follows: Target the fat ones. If the experiments go wrong, I can use the grease from the fat of their bellies and thighs in rendering useful substances for further study. Remember the rhyme that I taught you. 2 leagues south find the oak with the sign of Y. Travel an hour toward the sunset, where the failed and their dreams come to die. And it's signed B. And that's where we ended the session this week. We'll pick up next week with a casting of Detect Magic to determine what items in the loot are magical, and then we'll have to see how they get it all back to And will they ever investigate the monster in the well, or will that simply grow into some sort of horrible monstrosity that will devour the world because they never dealt with it early? Tune in next week to find out. Finally, on Sunday, we played session 34 of our Walker of Waterdeep campaign. In this episode, the party found themselves exploring some old stomping grounds of one of their companions, and that is Harakamar, a dwarven forge facility deep in the heart of the Chultan jungle. The Lord Dagal's gift flew through the night and wound up setting down a couple of hours after sunrise, about 6 miles away from the entry to Harakamar. The gnomish captain said her goodbyes to the PCs and their NPC traveling companions, and Barak Clanghammer suggested the ship should go to the harbor and wait for a sending in case they needed to be picked up. As the ranger, Thardrum was in his element as the party made their way through the jungle toward the Dwarven Forge complex. Along the way, they passed evidence that a few months earlier someone had created an enormous bonfire about 30 feet across. Inspecting more closely, they discovered it looked like a pile where hundreds of undead skeletons and zombies had been burned. A bit closer to the Dwarven Forge complex, they found evidence of a possible mass grave. The party were torn whether to investigate now or later, but eventually they decided to press on and come back to check if the mound is indeed the final resting place of many people or if it's something else. Using a pass without trace spell, Thardrum was able to help the party sneak up the last mile or so towards the entrance to Harakamar, which they found unguarded. As they got close, the dwarf ranger noted that a number of dwarves and humans had passed this way a couple of days earlier, and they were accompanied by creatures whose feet were unshod and that were hot enough to fuse sand where they walked. Now, Barak Clanghammer said that he had heard rumors that fire newts were among the retinue of the red dragon that had driven the dwarves out of the mine and out of Harakamar after Clanghammer had gone to Waterdeep to fulfill an oath so many years before. So the party entered Harakamar rather easily and made their way all the way down to the forge level without encountering any enemies. As they came out into the main magma rift that supplies the heat for the forge, however, they encountered barbed devils in the liquid magma, waiting to ambush anyone that came in with their ability to hurl fire great distances. But the devils had not counted on a gold dragon coming, apparently. So Barak Clanghammer assumed his true form, that of the dragon Aranax, and he began dealing with 2 of the 3 devils as the party scurried their way toward the forge, where they heard the sounds of hammers ringing. Eventually, the party discovered that the forge was being operated by a bunch of fire newts, evil creatures that worship Imix, the elemental prince of fire, and the battle was joined. So Chandler, who's been quiet the last few episodes, he was trying to contribute to the battle, but he was really out of his element. In his heavy plate mail, he was scalding hot, even under the effects of an Endure fire potion. He was not terribly effective shooting at enemies with his crossbow, nor at slashing them with his greatsword. But Galabar laid into the fire newts and quickly became a favorite target of them. But the barbarian's rage and his totem of the bear features mean that all of the attacks of the fire newts were far less effective than those enemies had hoped. Now, eventually, the other barbed devil reappeared, this time bringing a Maragon in tow. Now, a Maragon is a kind of frightful, devilish bodyguard. It almost looks human, except that it is faceless, and where the face should be is a metal mask with glowing points of light for eyes, covering a blank mass of flesh. and following the Maragon was its commander, a black Abishai, along with another Maragon bodyguard. Then the Abishai did something that caused us to go back and check our sanity and double check the rules a couple of times. Thank you, Wizards of the Coast. Okay, so what the Abishai did is it cast darkness in a particular area of the battlefield, and this had us second guessing each other and ourselves over two key questions with the spell darkness. The first was if light from a magic item would dispel the darkness entirely, or whether it would simply illuminate an area within the darkness. None of the official UA or rules explanations were really satisfying to me. So after the game, I worked with a couple of players to find some in-depth discussions that are recorded online, and I came up with a ruling that I like and I think everyone else can live with. The second issue of darkness is with disadvantage in combat. Now, if you read the rules as written, there are two rules that by their logic cancel each other out. So one rule states this: if you can't see your opponent and you don't have a feat like blind fighting, you have disadvantage on attack rolls. Pretty simple. Now, the other rule is, as a defender, if you can't see your attacker, you grant your attacker advantage. So, if you think about that, when you put those two together, if a PC who cannot see through magical darkness is fighting an enemy like a fire newt who also cannot see through magical darkness, by the logic of the rules, both of them have disadvantage on attacks. However, both of them grant advantage to their attackers, so that cancels out the disadvantage, and nobody has disadvantage in the fight. Now, that's the logic of the way that the rules work. But narratively, that's not really very satisfying. It's far more satisfying to say that if both sides can't see each other, then both sides should have disadvantage on their attack rolls, and basically it just sucks being an attacker when you can't see in magical darkness. End of story. So now I like trying to be faithful to the rules, and because of that, we played the fight out for as long as the darkness lasted, as though neither side had disadvantage because of the way those two rules I discussed earlier interact. But I'm going to propose to the group that we use rule of cool for this particular situation in the future. And by that rule of cool, we will say that the only attacker that does not suffer disadvantage in magical darkness is an attacker who can see through it and who is facing an opponent who cannot see through it. So, if both opponents cannot see through the magical darkness, I'm going to propose both of them have disadvantage, and we just don't worry about that whole thing of granting advantage to an attacker that you can't see. But I will go ahead and I will let the players vote on it, and we'll go with whatever a majority of the people want to do. Now, as I always tell my players, in the game, it is our story, and it's not exclusively my story. I may lay out the scenarios and the situations, but it's up to the players to work through them and see what happens. So I don't want to arbitrarily rule something that everybody else feels a different way about, but I'll justify the reasons why I think it should be that way, even though the logic of the rules says that it's not, and we'll see how everybody feels. All right, so Thardrum was able to use his Planar Warrior feature to great effect and dealt some lethal blows to a number of the fire newts. Now, Oyahusa was the usual whirlwind that he is on the battlefield, and it's possible that he may have landed more hits on more enemies than any other combatant. Now, Xandri was able to counterspell the darkness that gave us so much fits, and lifted it from the battlefield before too long. And she also got in a few solid hits of her own. But Galabar's greatsword smote heavy, deadly blows to a couple of the devils, and the battle was soon won, with Aranax coming in to mop up the last of the abyssal foes. Now, when the last of the devils fell, the party heard a significant number of fire newts running away. Later, when they found the office of the Abishai that had been in charge as overseer of this work camp, they came to understand that the fire newts were slaves of the Githyanki and the devils, along with records indicating that there are also dwarf and human slaves that the party has not yet found. So we ended with the party looking through the papers of the devils in the office, learning a bit more about the infernal contracts that they had made with the Githyanki for the disposition of slaves, the production quotas and shipments of the ore and the materials they're creating in the forge, the work orders that they were filling, the compensation being paid in souls, in flesh, and in valuables, and most importantly of all, information on where the alloys and items being produced were being sent. So what's going to happen next week? Well, you'll just have to tune in and find out. And that is Tales from the Table for Tuesday, the 21st of January, 2020. All right, everyone, have a great evening. Good night.